This question asks for a bunch of information. We're going to do the same thing we were doing with example 1 and example 2. We're going to go through the process as if we were going to graph this completely. So that process meant number 1, we're going to take our equation and factor it as much as possible. So this one in A, the bottom factors to x plus 2, x minus 2. Now, that leads us to the first thing that we looked for, which were our non-permissible values and whether they were vertical asymptotes or holes. So we can list our non-permissible values. X can't equal -2 and x can't equal 2. Here, I'm going to put this one. Those are our non-permissible values. Are they going to be holes or asymptotes? Since nothing cancels out, these will both be vertical asymptotes. Step number 2 was we're going to look at horizontal asymptotes or oblique asymptotes. And we do that by looking for the highest power. The highest power in this equation is an x squared. We have no x squareds on the top, 1x squared on the bottom. That simplifies to 0. So y equals 0 is going to be our horizontal asymptote. Our third step, we looked for x intercepts and y intercepts. We always started with the y-intercept, so I'll do that one first. Our y-intercept is when x is 0. Can you see that you would get -4 over -4? So our y-intercept is at 1. Our x-intercept, if you put y equal to 0, the only way a fraction is equal to 0 is if the numerator is equal to 0. And that will happen when x equals 4. So once you've got your asymptotes and your intercepts, we might have enough information right now. So we go to step 4, which is our graphing step. Draw our asymptotes on here. So we have one asymptote at x equals 2, another asymptote at x equals -2. And we have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. We have an x-intercept at 4 and a y-intercept at 1. So from this part, we can draw one section. We can draw the middle section. The middle section is going to have to go like this towards the asymptotes, because if it went down towards the asymptotes, can you see that you would have 2 new x-intercepts? And we only have the one x-intercept at x equals 4. But we have nothing to the left of x equals -2. So we're going to have to find a point by plugging in -3 into our equation. If I go to our factored form of our equation, if you plug in -3, can you see on the top you would get -7? And if I plug -3 on the bottom, I would get a -1 times a -5, which is +5. So I get -7/5 when I plug in -3. Going down to put that point onto my graph, -3, -7/5, that will be in that bottom section. So once you have that point, again, you have enough information. You know it won't cross that horizontal asymptote because we only have the one x-intercept. Now, in the last section, we have a point, but it's right on the asymptote. This is one of the times where the graph is going through that asymptote. We've got to figure out what is happening to this graph. So let's look at a number as it gets close to the asymptote. What happens as we get close to 2? From this side, would I choose 2.1 or 1.9? 2.1, because I want to check from the right-hand side. So I'm going to go to my factored part again. I'm going to check 2.1. Can you see that the top would be negative? 2.1 plus 2 will be positive. 2.1 minus 2 will be positive. A negative over positive, positive. That will be negative. That tells me that this part of my graph will go down towards my asymptote. What's going to happen to the right? Well, if you wanted to, you could find another point. Like we could plug in 5, and you can do this with a number of points. So if you're ever unsure, you could keep finding a table of values, plugging in x values, finding what y is. So for example, if I plug in 5, 5 minus 4 is 1, 5 plus 2 is 7, 5 minus 2 is 3. I'm going to get 1 over 21. So I could plot another point, 5 comma 1 over 21, if I wanted to. What we're going to find is this graph comes back up a little bit, and then it's going to approach that asymptote again. We don't know how high it goes up, how far it goes before it goes back down, but we know that as x gets really, really big, we have that horizontal asymptote at the end.
Attention all grade 10 teachers, if you can please make sure that your attendance is entered and completed, because I need to now call down the third and fourth batches of our students for the Safe Teams presentation. For the girls, group
All right,
3,
part B.
I need you to go to room 2E3. Group 3 students.
Again, we'll factor it to begin with.
Our last names beginning with S as in Fair, Kennedy Fair, but ending with Kernahan, Anna Kernahan.
They're both difference of squares.
Through to K, Kernahan is the end. You guys are going to room 2E3. The second group of girls, group 4, you're going to room 2C6. The first last name that we're going to start with is Kidd. That's Lauren Kidd.
2 non-permissible values, because they would cause us to divide by 0. Holes are asymptotes.
So if you guys could please report to room 2C6. For our boys,
Those will both be vertical asymptotes,
last name, starting with Henry,
because nothing's simplified.
following through to Mooney.
Step 2,
Mooney.
looking at the highest powers. The highest power is an x squared. We have 1 x squared on the top, 1 x squared on the bottom. That'll simplify to just be 1.
Begins with McDonald,
So that'll be
runs through to Shapa, Conrad Shapa.
a horizontal asymptote. Step 3, y-intercept and x-intercepts. Well, your y-intercept, when you plug in 0 for x, you're going to get negative 4 over negative 9. So that'll just be 4/9. X-intercepts, when y is 0, the only time your fraction is going to equal 0 is when the numerator is equal to 0. So that'll happen at x equals negative 2 and x equals 2.
Mr. Libby, if you can please report back to your class, please. Mr. Libby, please report back to your class.
Uh-oh. So we have 2 vertical asymptotes. One at positive 3, one at negative 3. We have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 1. Our y-intercept is at 4/9. And we have x-intercepts at 2 and negative 2. So from this, we already have enough information to draw this part of our graph. To find out what happens in the other sections, we're going to have to choose a value less than -3. So if I plug in -4 into my original equation, can you see that you would get -2, -6, -1, -7, and that would simplify to be 12/7. So plugging in -4 gives me 12/7. That's in this section. So now you can just draw it towards the asymptotes. Plugging in +4. Maybe you can see that plugging in +4 is going to be symmetrical to plugging in -4 because they're getting squared there. So we're also going to have +4, 12/7. So this section looks like that. So again, our steps. What have we done? We're looking at our non-permissible values to figure out if they're holes or vertical asymptotes. Then we look at our highest power in the fraction to figure out if we have a horizontal asymptote or an oblique asymptote. Once you have those asymptotes, find some points, find our X intercepts and Y intercepts, because those are easy ones to start with. Then graph, and you may have to find a few more points, or you may have to check the asymptotic behavior to do them all. So, questions for this one are number 9 and 10.